So this is a new kind of episode where I'm doing a reaction to Mohammed Hijab. I'm gonna go ahead and start the video.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing? Recently, science journalist and retired zoologist Richard Dawkins has made an attempt to become relevant again in the last moments of his life by
So he already starts by being a jerk. Uh, his last attempts, as if he's old. I don't know how old he is, but I know plenty of guys that did really good intellectual work into their mid 90s. And he said to become relevant again. I don't know when he stopped being relevant. And Mohammed Hijab doesn't explain. And here he's making claims without evidence. And a little bit later, he complains. You'll see.
speaking about Islam. Let's take a look at the video and come back and respond in kind.
The way women are treated. I mean, Christianity is not great about that. It's had its problems with female vicars and female bishops and things. But there's an active hostility to women, which is promoted, I think, by the holy books of Islam. I'm not talking about individual Muslims, who, of course, are quite different. But the doctrines of Islam, the Hadith and the Quran, is fundamentally hostile to women, hostile to gays, and I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
Let's really assess what this man is saying, because he's made a few assertions, hasn't he? And this is typical of Richard Dawkins, to make assertions and not back them with evidence.
Assertions without evidence. So Mohammed Hijab did that a couple of minutes ago. Or not a couple of minutes ago, 30 seconds ago. When he said some claims about Richard Dawkins without having any evidence for his claims. And I want to be clear that just because somebody does that doesn't mean there isn't evidence that they haven't shown yet. So sometimes you write a book, in the title you make a claim. You have the evidence in the book, but then people don't read the book. Those people shouldn't be complaining that there isn't evidence or you didn't present evidence. That would be retarded.
He mentioned the Quran, he mentioned the Sunnah, he mentioned the Hadith. However, he didn't actually provide any evidence of what he is saying. Now, we all know Islam has a diametrically opposed, in many ways, view on, say, homosexuality or the morality thereof.
When people say things like "we all know," that's a fucking lie. They know some people don't know. They're doing it as a way to cheat. It's a way to trick dumb people who can't see what's wrong with that dumbass sentence.
Than, let's say, liberal societies and so on. That's something which is taken for granted. We all know that. We also know that there is some level of, if you like, a managerial hierarchy in the family setting and otherwise between men and women in Islam. But to go further than this and to say that Islam is hostile towards women, hostile towards gays, and then to compare it with Christianity, well, actually, the same kind of criticism from a liberal paradigm can be made about Christianity in its literal and orthodox formats, both Catholicism and Protestantism, and Judaism, in fact, regarding the two very issues that he mentioned. From a liberal.
Yeah, that's all true. And I don't know what point Dawkins was trying to make. We only saw a little bit from that video. I didn't see that video from Dawkins outside of the context of Mohammed Hijab's video. Yeah, it's true that if you look in the source documents of those three religions, they're all saying the same stuff when it comes to hate of gays, sexism against women, Although I think maybe Islam is a little bit worse. I don't know. Even if it's not worse, then they're all the same. That part doesn't matter. It's agreeing with what Mohammed Hijab is saying. But what Dawkins is thinking, I don't know that he said it. I've seen him say it other places, and everyone else says this too, that understands this. Everyone else that understands this is what their basic point is, that Christianity, we should think of Christianity or Islam or Judaism like two kinds of it. One version of it is the stuff that's written in books that potentially nobody reads today anymore. And another way to think of what Christianity is, Judaism is, and what Islam is to think of what it is inside the minds of the people, not what it is on pages that were written 1400 years ago. And if you compare Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in that way, not pages written 1400 years ago or 2000 or 5000 years ago, but how the religious ideas exist in the minds of people today, Christianity is way better than Islam, and Judaism is too. And it's not because of the religions, really. It's more because of the Enlightenment era of Europe, which kind of has nothing to do with the religions, which in some sense agreeing with Mohammed Hijab in saying that Christianity and Islam are in the same boat. But then that would lead you to say both boats are wrong. But Mohammed Hijab's not doing that, because he's clearly a Muslim and arguing for Islam. So this makes no sense.
And feministic paradigm. So one could say that on a liberal, atheist, secular analysis, for example, the verse in Timothy which talks about the man being the head of the household, or that man shall not lie with other man, and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And those are things that you'll find in the Bible. So to compare Islam and Christianity and then to use those liberal talking points, as they are, liberal talking points with a small l, against them, is actually a weak argument, to say the least. And Richard Dawkins is a coward because he has not been able to argue his position as a zoologist, because that's what he is. I mean, why is a zoologist talking about religion anyway? Why is he talking about theology? Why?
So now he's trying to say that Richard Dawkins is wrong because he's not an expert in the field that he's talking about. And that is retarded. You don't need to be an expert in anything. Your idea needs to be right. And yeah, maybe it's hard for non-experts to arrive at the correct ideas in certain fields. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. I'm not what you would call a theologist, but I'm correct about Islam. I'm not an expert in theology. I don't need to be an expert in theology. I don't need to be an expert in physics in order to know that if I walk downhill, I have to walk differently than if I'm walking on a level floor. The only reason that pops in my head is I remember my 2-year-old, 1.5-year-old daughter for their first time walking on a slanted or on an incline hill, and I could tell it surprised her the way she moved her leg. It was as if she thinks the floor is level, and it wasn't. That's a thing she learned. That is a physics thing. You know, we learn a little bit about how gravity works when, over the course of 20 years, we see shit falling down. Even if we don't know it by the name gravity, and even if we don't know any theory from a physicist like Isaac Newton or Einstein, we understand a little bit about how gravity works. We understand it to the extent of how it affects us in our lives. We know not to jump off a bridge because we know what would happen after that. And that's physics. And we don't need to be physics experts to know that.
Why is he talking about philosophy? Why is he talking about all those things in the first place? But let's say he does want to engage in those discussions. Instead of...
Why does he want to talk about philosophy? For Richard Dawkins to become a good enough biologist to do the stuff that he did, he had to become a good enough philosopher also. This is another way of saying, if you become a really good specialist, that actually improves your generalist skills. So if you become a generalist, what I'm arguing here is you can't become a really good specialist and you didn't become a generalist. Those two things can't happen together. You can massively improve your specialist skills if you directly improve your generalist skills. If that's confusing for anybody, what I just said, please ask me about it. I'll try to explain. I don't think I'm explaining it very well. Maybe this deserves its own video and post.
Being brave and gallant and having the intellectual courage of standing forth in front of someone who could oppose his views and challenge them, he just makes a few sneaky remarks on the radio. Well, as I say, we'll see what happens when you die, because that moment is coming soon.
We're not going to see what happens when he dies. We can't see that because either we're alive and we don't know what's happening. Like, all we see is that their body stops moving and you know, their body's turning to dirt. That is what we know. And then if we're dead, we can't know things. So when he says we will see what happens when he dies, he's fucking lying. And note, that is a claim that he did not argue with evidence. Another one that he's complaining about other people making claims without evidence. Here he is doing it repeatedly in the same video where he's making that complaint about other people.
We could all die soon. I could die, you could die, but you're more likely to die much quicker than I because of your age. And so you should be thinking about really what's going to happen after your death.
So he's saying the older you are, the more you should be thinking about what happens after your death. I mean, I guess that makes sense. If you're 5 minutes away from your death, let's say you know somehow that you're 5 minutes away, maybe you should think about that more. I don't know. I don't think it makes sense, like, think about your death. Like, the kind of things I care about related to my death is how do I make sure my loved ones are set up without me when I'm dead, like especially my kids. That's it. I'm not worried about what happens other than that, because in my understanding, nothing else happens. We die, we become dirt, our loved ones miss us, and that's it.
One thing I will say is this. In one of your books, The Blind Watchmaker, Richard, you mentioned that there is no such thing as morality. There is no such thing as good or evil. There is only pitiless indifference.
So I disagree with Richard Dawkins on that. I didn't even know he said that. And I don't know if Mohammed Hijab is accurate in what he's saying about Dawkins, but I do know there's a lot of, or most maybe even, most atheists say that morality is subjective. I don't agree with them. Morality is objective.
So really and truly, if you read The God Delusion, which is your seminal work, which is interesting because why is a zoologist writing a seminal work on issues nothing to do with zoology or science? And when you spoke to Dennis Noble, who is seen as one of the esteemed esteemed biologist in the United Kingdom, in fact, in the world, and he rubbished your ideas and criticized you and put you in your spot and humiliated you intellectually. And he, in fact, is the one who invented.
So he's making a bunch of claims without arguments again. And I just want to remind you guys, I'm not complaining that he's making claims without arguments. Because I understand that the arguments can be somewhere else, like hasn't been stated yet. I'm only saying this because he was using it as an argument against Dawkins. And I'm showing how, if that argument is true, it applies to Mohammed Hijab apparently 100 times in this fucking video. And what's the part that... There was another part he just said.
Or evil. There is only pitiless indifference. So really and truly, if you read The God Delusion, which is your seminal work, which is interesting because why is a zoologist writing a seminal work on issues nothing to do with zoology or science? And
he says something is interesting because, but then the following part after the because wasn't a statement, it was a question. That's fucking retarded. He's using the question as if it is a statement. And he's presenting it as if, well, there's no good answer to the question. Therefore, but you should say all that. Don't leave it implied. That's cheating.
when you spoke to Dennis Noble, who is seen as one of the esteemed biologists in the United Kingdom, in fact, in the world, and he rubbished your ideas and criticized you and put you in your spot and humiliated you intellectually.
Humiliated you intellectually. So scientists don't think this way. When a scientist disagrees with another scientist, like, for example, when Einstein disagreed with Newton, when Einstein created his theory of relativity, which explained gravity and light, nobody would say that he intellectually humiliated Newton. Scientists don't think that way. First of all, we're happy when we find out we're wrong, because then helps us get to the right side of the truth. We're not humiliated. Humiliation is what happens to the non-scientists, the type of people who think, I hope everything I believe today is true, and the moment that I find out I'm wrong about something, I have to feel humiliated because I was supposed to be perfect and I found out I'm not. Some bullshit, stupid thing like that. Like it's bad to be wrong. It's not bad to be wrong. We're wrong a lot. What's bad is to find out you're wrong and then not do anything to fix it.
And he, in fact, is the one who invented this label science journalist vis-a-vis you and your efforts. You really couldn't withstand that kind of criticism. But if you read your book, The God Delusion, most of it is actually attacks are based on morality. But if you do not believe in an objective morality and that everything is pitiless and different...
So Mohammed Hijab is saying something correct here. He's saying that in The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins explains that morality is not objective, but then he goes and explains how some moral ideas are wrong, which means he's operating as if morality is objective. So Dawkins is contradicting himself, and all these atheists that do that are contradicting themselves.
So whether one is hostile to gays, one is hostile to women, one is hostile to men or children or animals or anyone else, that is, according to you, pitiless indifference. It doesn't matter if they are hostile or not hostile, peaceful or hostile, doesn't matter. Finally, I will say this: the entitlement in your speech is quite clear. For you to speak in this way and to think of the United Kingdom as kind of like your garden or your backyard, I wouldn't want to see this there and I wouldn't see that there. It shows you that you don't actually have respect for the democratic process. She kept asking you, what if, Britain became a Muslim majority country, so on and so forth. I mean, if you...
He's trying to complain that Dawkins doesn't respect the democratic process. I want to explain why that is ridiculous. The scientific approach is not a democratic process. There's no scientist that believes a scientific theory because a majority of other scientists believe that theory. Each scientist judges the theory on his own, based on the content of the theory, not based on how many other people believe it. I want to clarify one more thing. I'm not saying democracy is not important, but look at how the U.S. government works. We have a Congress that it's a representatives of the people, but it's trying to do, like a majority vote kind of concept. But also there's the U.S. Constitution, which is a document that spells out individual rights that Congress can't get rid of with the majority vote. Majority vote, or let me say it another way, democracy and just majority vote of the majority doesn't get rid of individual rights. So this is another way of saying that the truth is independent of majority vote.
cared about the principles of democracy and so on and so forth, then you would actually answer in a way which would be commensurate with that. You'd say, well, if that's the will of the majority, of this and that, which shows you that you cannot avoid the in-group, out-group tribal dynamics. In your last days on this planet, probably, or weeks, if you're lucky, months, maybe, in those last moments of your withering life, you've decided to attach yourself culturally with a religion that you've spent a long time trying to oppose, which is Christianity, which shows a lot about you. Finally, I will say...
So I come from a Islamic background. My parents were Muslims. I was born and raised in America. When I hear people say that that America is built on Judeo-Christian values, it is built on Judeo-Christian values. The values I'm talking about are things like separation of church and state. Things like loving life instead of death, and a lot of other things. And I want to be clear, these values maybe didn't exist early on, but they exist now for sure. The whole separation of church and state is 100 years old now. And I'm not saying we're doing great on it. We're kind of going in reverse in America a little bit on that front. Let's see.
The debate offer has always been put on the table to you, Richard. We've always said if you really want to speak about Islam, the Muslim community is willing to have that conversation.
Okay, well, I'll do that for Mohammed Hijab too. If you really want to talk about Islam, why don't you talk with an expert? Well, I'm claiming to be an expert. Maybe you don't think I'm an expert. Uh, well, it should be easier for you if you're an expert on Islam and you think I'm not. Then it should be really easy for you to show how I'm wrong about all these things. Just pick anything in this video and explain to me how I'm wrong about it. You're welcome to do that, just like Dawkins is welcome to do it with you.
And before you die, maybe you'd want to summon the testicular fortitude, although maybe that has withered as well, to do so. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hey, you! Are you wasting your time or...
All right, that's it for now.